Greetings, this is Ron Smalek, and I am reading The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. It is an excellent book. I'm reading it after having watched the movie, and I wanted to record some of my thoughts chapter by chapter. Alright, so chapter 23 of The Hunger Games has quite a bit of information in it, not a ton of action, that's alright. We find Katniss and Peeta in their cave, both recovering from their wounds. They have some discussion about the victors, and I think this is really the chapter where they've finally gotten through enough. They think they have a chance of winning, and they haven't confirmed it in their mind yet, but they're thinking through the ramifications of what will happen when they win. They discuss the fact that the victors will live in special houses in District 12 that are set apart from the rest of the district, which makes some sense. For whatever reason, I always thought Haymitch lived in the capital, but that was just an assumption that I made. It turns out he's pretty much the only one living in this nice section, and by winning, they will basically be forced to become friends and or at least neighbors with him. They start to speculate on how Haymitch perhaps won the Hunger Games in his year, and they decide it's definitely not because he was fastest or strongest, but he must have outsmarted the competitors in some way. Obviously, a lot of people are probably interested in seeing a Haymitch prequel to the Hunger Games. I have no idea if that's possible, but I also think that would make a cool graphic novel. Katniss realizes that if she wins, she will have to become a mentor for the girls who come year after year to go into the Hunger Games, and she's not too comfortable with that idea of basically sending kids to their deaths. At this point, I think Thresh dies, and they see through a crack in the opening to the cave, they see his face on the wall. Again, I would have loved to see what that battle between Thresh and Cato looked like. Peeta talks a little bit about his past and about eating bread, and the fact that even though he was the baker's son, they often ate the stale bread and they saved the good bread for their customers, which gives Katniss a little bit more insight into his character. They also realize that, or Katniss realizes that if she ever has kids, those kids will not be safe, and when their time comes, they will be, in the drawing for the Hunger Games. Even though she was the victor, her kids will still be potentially picked to be in the games, and that also kind of scares her. Like, even if they win, it's still a bleak future no matter what. She takes stock of her situation. Now she's down to 7 arrows, and she still cannot hear out of her left ear, so I think that's a significant handicap, and I love the fact that the author remembers these little details. They go outside to do some hunting, and Peeta has trouble moving silently. He's kind of never been in the woods before. He's sort of blundering around, stepping on every stick. She's trying to think of a nice way to tell him that, and he's kind of reading her mind and offering to split up on his own, which I thought was an interesting. I bet you they would, if they had started this in different situations, they would actually make a pretty good team. The one thing about this, though, is that I don't think the setup of him making all this noise ever paid off that much, other than separating them, giving them time to think on their own, letting Katniss realize that sort of contrast between Peeta and Gale. But I don't believe that his noisiness ever actually pays off in a negative way later on. And then basically Katniss comes back and finds that Peeta has collected some poisonous berries, and she accuses him of having eaten some or some cheese. Then they find out that it was actually Foxface who snuck up and stole it while they were out, and therefore Peeta accidentally killed Foxface. And it's interesting, the way he seems to take it is he's a little bit disturbed by the fact that he killed someone, which is interesting because earlier in the book, if you remember, he went back to take care of the girl who made the campfire in one of the first couple chapters of the game section. So obviously he didn't kill that person, and his fighting so far has just been part of his plan to survive. Chapter 24, they basically do some more hunting and gathering and eating. Nothing spectacular. and they leave the cave, and they basically both realize and sense, they've had the discussions of what happens after, they've reflected on what happened before the games, and this is it. They're ready for it to be over. They're going to end it. Whether they win or lose, they won't be coming back to the cave. They try to decide which direction to go. They go down to the stream, which after the rains has suddenly completely dried up, even though it was flooded. I think it was just the day or day two before. They realize that the game masters are obviously going to drive them to water, which means the lake. And they basically resolve to go to the cornucopia by the lake. They check around their sittings. They don't see any sign of Kato. And it sounds like they basically just sit down at the edge of the lake in plain view in all directions and just sit and wait for something to happen. And they sit and wait, which was an interesting sort of, all right, we're done. If he shows up, we'll shoot him. If he kills us, he kills us. Kato eventually does come crashing out of the woods after quite a while. I think it was perhaps the next day. And he's shot with an arrow but bounces off, and they realize he's wearing some kind of body armor. They're starting to get a little bit nervous, but guess what? He's not actually running toward them. He runs right past them, and he's being chased by some quote-unquote creatures.